Okay, I'd like to look at this exercise. Would like to write a program that calculates the average of n numbers. So the program should prompt the user or ask the user to enter n, what is n, and then afterwards and the user will enter all the n numbers. So if the user enters the first n is 5, so the user will enter 5 numbers. Then we'll calculate the average of those 5 numbers given by the user. But then there's something that will involve something new that we haven't seen yet, which is, now if the user enters a non-positive value, which is like a negative value, then an exception should be thrown and caught. So we're going to throw an exception. This is something new to us. We have not thrown an exception, we were catching. Yesterday we've seen that we can put some kind of a try catch statement which is going to try to execute some code, and if there's some kind of an exception, we catch it and do something with it. Now the exception was thrown by something, we did not throw it ourselves. Now we need to learn how to throw an exception, and that's what I'd like to get this example to be used for. And then this exception we throw and catch with the message n must be positive. And if there is any exception as the user is entering the n numbers, an error message should be displayed and the user prompted to enter the number again. Now what I'm going to do the thing, this is like a back return to Java 1, and just do the exercise without the exceptions. What if I'd like to ask the user to give me a number, how many numbers he wants, and then ask him to give me those numbers, and then I display the average of those numbers. Then I'm going to get into this thing of having these exceptions and so on. So what I'm going to do is just put the code here. Now what is this thing? I'm just going to go to declare a variable n. I need to read from the user, so basically the old scanner, keyb equal new scanner system.in. Then I'm going to ask the user, please enter n, and then maybe without the ln, and then n is going to be keyb.next int. Then I'd like to get the user to give me all the numbers. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have an integer, an array, or maybe the sum. Well, I'm just going to save them in an array, just just for fun. So these are the numbers. Do I know what's the size? But n there's nothing in it yet. Can I put n minus 1 and I'm declaring an array of minus 1? Well, that's a nice thing. What happens if I do minus 1 and declare an array of minus 1? Now if you run this thing, now I'm going to declare an array of size n, which is going to raise an exception. Negative array size exception. Why? Because you cannot have an array of minus 5 or minus 1. So I cannot do this here. I cannot remove the number. I cannot put the number myself because I would like this to be the number that the user gave me. But then the user is giving me the number only at this time. I'm going to put n here, lowercase, because capital letter, capital N means like maybe some kind of like a constant. Okay, so I'm going to rename these to how many numbers. So this how many numbers that I'm putting like the n, I'm reading from the user, and then this is going to be the size of my array that's going to hold all the numbers. Now what I need to do is a for loop to read all the numbers. Numbers dot length, and then numbers of I equal what? Number of what? Number of? Well, you just let me down in the middle of the sentence. No, number of what? Number of I plus?
No, after plus. After number 5 plus. Number 5 plus number 5.
I'm not sure to understand now what do you want me to do?
How many numbers?
Okay, what do you want me to do here? What should I do?
Plus how many numbers?
Plus how many numbers? Like this?
Yes.
What does this mean? It means that look at what's inside number. Let's say the first time I is 0. You look at what's inside of number 0. Okay, did you put anything inside of it yet? No. But they're going to be zeros because it's a non-primitive data type, so by default they're going to be set to 0. So I'm going to add how many to how many numbers? The number, let's say if I put 5, now number of 0 is going to be 5. Then I becomes 1 and I put 5. Now 2, 5, 3, 5. So what's the point?
Should be KB dot numbers at type.
KB dot
Yes, number
number.
numbers, and then inside the I.
What is that?
Value.
What does this mean? KB dot KB is
The user enters the new.
the scanner, right? And what is this? It doesn't have KB dot does not have any numbers. I can call methods. There's no variable that is available here. And the numbers I that you said is a variable, but this variable is here, not inside the scanner. Well, thank you. We said that we're going to read now the numbers from the user. We just ask the user how many numbers do you want, and we store it here. We declared an array that can hold that many numbers, and then for each one of those numbers we're going to read them from the user and put them into the array. Make sense? Welcome back to Java 1. It's been a long time since you're Java 1, right? Okay, then what's next?
Declare sum.
I declare sum and initialize it to
0.
Plus number 5.
0 plus
No, just delete 0 and put number of 5.
number of I.
Plus. After.
Well, if you put plus, that means you would like to look what was inside. But what was inside sum? Nothing. You just put in something in it. So you cannot do this.
Initialize sum.
You cannot do this, right? Because you're declaring and then you're asking to look what was inside, but you did not put anything inside, and then you're adding something to it. But there's a problem. What is I?
It's only declared inside the loop.
It's already declared inside the loop. What some might say, well, you know what? Well, you can fix this by declaring it outside. Now I just declared outside, and here it is. But this is not correct. this is going to raise an exception again. If I run and I give the number is 2, now it asks me, okay, enter first number, well, 1 and 2, and then there's an exception, array index out of bound exception with 2. Which line? This line over here, line 30, which is, this is the line that created the problem. I'm just going to make it clear that you ask the users, please enter well, I don't know, how can I say N1? Now this is just to display something like this. If I put, okay, in 2 numbers, please enter N1, please enter N2, and then there's the exception on line 31 now, because this is a new line that I just added. Okay, so why is this a problem? I'm sorry? Well, it's an error, but why there's an exception? Now, to fix something, that's the other thing, but why there is an exception? Yes.
Because it's only checking one of the numbers, not all of it. The array, it's not checking the whole array.
So if I'm checking one of the numbers of the array, I'm going to get an exception?
Because I is not initialized.
It is initialized. I initialize it by 0. Well, I changed it inside the for loop, but it's initialized. It has a value. If it didn't have a value, it will just ask me, okay, for example, if I check this and put it before, it will tell me, well, I don't know what's I. I has not been initialized. But it has been initialized. I put something in it. The first time 0, and then 1, and then that's it. Well, that's not your best day today. I don't know what happened, but yeah, let's focus a bit more. Now look at this thing and tell me, based on the example that I mentioned, what is the value of I?
0.
When I used n to be 2. Now I is going to start to 0, and then it will be 1 and 2
No, just 1.
and 3,
Just 1.
just 1.
Because,
Now what is inside of I? That's what we need to focus on. We put 0 in I, so the first time I is 0. Is that okay? So I put 0 in I now. Then I'm asking, is 0 less than this? What is this? Based on this example, that's this number here, right? This is 2. So is 0 less than 2? Yes. I get inside, display something, and then put in number of 0 something from the keyboard, which is, this is what I did. I put in number 0 this thing here. Then numbers become, then I becomes 1. Is 1 less than 2?
Yes.
I get inside and I'm going to put in numbers of 1, I'm going to put this number that I entered, the 2. And then I becomes what?
2. Yeah.
2. Is 2 less than 2? No, I get out. So what's inside of I is 2, and this becomes false because of that. And then when I come here and ask, okay, numbers of I, what's inside of I? It's 2. Now, what's the size of my array? I put 2, right? This is what I typed. When I have an array of 2, what is the maximum index that I can have? Up to 1. And when you use more, you get array index out of bound exception. And here's the number that created that exception, 2, because we don't have an index of 2.
So I should write equal, less than equal.
Now I just would like you to understand why we got the exception first. Then later on we need to fix it. But first of all, it was not clear to you why we got an exception. But now you know that this is going to create an exception. So we said, okay, you know what, we're going to, no, just put it back. We're going to declare this I outside because just to fix this, but this is not really helping because we don't need it to be 2. And why are you looking only at 2? What you would like to have the sum of 0 and then sum of every element in the array plus sum of 1. But now what if this is, I don't know how many of these are. So what I should do something.
The array. Have the sum inside the array.
The sum inside the array,
Inside the loop, sorry.
inside the loop. So I need to get the sum inside the loop or create another loop just for calculating the sum. What I could do, just, okay, make it another loop. Well, basically I can just copy this. And then inside this loop, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the sum and do whatever you're looking for. This plus equal numbers of I. Now this is going to be okay, because now I becomes 0 again, and then it's going to be 0, then 1, and then it will get out. Or because it's the same loop, as you can see, I can just take this and put it inside this one. Of course, now I need to take this declaration and move it up. And then I don't need to have another loop. Yeah. Why it's not going to be 3? Yeah. Well, the I plus 1, is it stored inside of I? When I'm doing this, am I changing the value of I? I'm just looking at what's inside of it. And I didn't want to it. I'm not changing it. Because changing it means I need to do I equal and then something. Then I'm changing I. But as long as I'm not using this I equal, because this is what makes a change inside of a variable. But doing just this doesn't make a change of a variable. I'm just looking at what's inside of a variable, add what to it, add 1 to it, and then this is going to be added to this here. So the only thing that happens here is that instead of having n0, I'm going to see n1. That's what shows this n1 here. If I remove this I plus 1, it's going to be n0. So this is just displaying. I'm not changing the I. The I stays 0, but I'm displaying 1. When it becomes 1, I'm displaying 2, and so on. So is that okay now?
And print the sum.
Now I just need to print the sum. The sum is, and then sum. And let's run, and let's put more numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the sum is 15. How do I know? Okay, 5 plus 4 plus 1, that's 10. And that's 5, so that's 15. Is that okay? Now there are a couple of things that can go wrong. If I do something like this, it gets wrong. If I do something like this, it gets wrong. And now we're going to deal with that thing. Now notice that this is the type of exception. Okay, hold on. This is the type of exception that I got. Input mismatch exception, when I entered some kind of weird text while I'm expecting a number. Because if you look at this next int is going to call another next int with a parameter, which is going to be doing this int radix whatever, and this is doing some checking. But check this, it says that in the documentation this I wanted to see it in a, okay, I'm not seeing it here. Maybe let's try to see it here. Now you see in the method, this next int, it explains, it scans the next token, blah blah blah, etc. It returns an int, But then there's something else. It throws input mismatch exception, no such element exception, illegal state exception. Now what does this mean? These are all different type of exceptions that this method might throw. Which means if you call this method, maybe one of these three exceptions might happen. So it tells you that if you're using this method, if you'd like to program safely and to make your program handle all the exceptions that can happen, you need to be able to watch for these exceptions if they're thrown. So if you want to deal with each separate exception on its own, you have to do like what we did here. For this exception, you have a special catch. For this other exception, you have another catch. And that's what I'm going to do here. In this code, I'm going to do something now, which is, as you have noticed, there are two types of exceptions. Either if I do something like this, now this is an exception not from this next int was okay. But when I reach this line 26, which is this one, I got a problem, which is negative array size exception. And then when I'm running it again, but this time with some weird numbers, some text that it can be converted, it tries to do something. This is my code in line 25. This is the next int. This one tried to convert the text that I typed into a number, into an integer, and then it couldn't, and it threw an input mismatch exception. So what I can do, I can just deal with those exceptions separately. Or, no, I don't. I would like to deal with all of them at once, and I can just do something like this. Select the whole thing and surround it with a try catch. Now this whole thing is going to be try, catch, and checked here. Because many type of exceptions can happen, I don't want to specify specific one for each one. I use exception. Actually, NetBeans gave me the exception because this is the superclass of all exceptions. So even if it's an input mismatch exception, I will put it inside of exception. It's possible because of upcasting, which is always possible as long as there is an inheritance between them. And this input mismatch exception is an exception. Or the array index out of bound exception is an exception. It's inheriting from exception. All these exceptions are inherited from exception. And the size array size exception is also inheriting from exception. Any of those exceptions are inheriting from here, from this exception. So if I put something like this, I can say, okay, something wrong happened, and then I can maybe give more details by using this parameter that I have. So the parameter is e. I can use get message, so I can get some kind of a message. Now if I run this thing again, this time if I put some negative numbers, it will tell me something wrong happened and null. Well, there was no message in there, that's why I get the null. Why? Because if I remove this try catch thing and I run it again, I put a negative, there's no thing that shows any message here. It just shows me like there's an exception and there's nothing here. As compared to, let's hold on, which one? As compared to another type of exception, when I type this, and then what was the exception again? Yeah, sorry, yeah, that's not the one that I wanted. But when I type this, like a text here. Oh, even though here the text it did not give me anything. I'm sorry? No message at all. Yes, I don't have any message, but there was one that gave me a message. What was it? Yeah, when I tried maybe to put okay, let's do something like this. I plus 5. I know that this is going to be not any index that is correct, because I'm going to try and see if I put like the size of 2. Now as long as I press 5, it gets me array index out of bound exception, and there's something after that. This is the message, which means now if I do this, sorry, let's leave it as it is. If I put a try catch here and then put the catch back, if I run it again and do the same thing, put like 2 and then try to type a number, and now we see this, but this is not the same 5. This is not this 5. I was not choosing right. The 5 means because the first time I 0 plus 5, that's 5, it gives me, this is the message that was a problem. But you see now, if I have like get message, it's not always helpful. It might be more helpful to catch a specific exception and tell a specific message for each one of those exceptions. And this is what I'm going to do, so to make this even more interesting. So I'm going just to pay attention to what kind of exceptions do I have, and I'm going to catch them. But for now, I'm just going to remove them and then run it again and try with okay, what if it's a negative number? Now negative numbers, I have this negative array size exception. Okay, so I'm going just to put all this code, I'm going to surround it with a try catch, but here inside of this exception I'm going to use negative array size exception. And now when I have this, I can send some useful message saying that the size of the array cannot be negative. Okay, now this catches only one type of exception, so if it's negative it's going to show me that, but if it's not, it's just going to work fine. But what if I type this then? Oh, I type this, now I have another type of exception, input mismatch exception. I'm going to now add another catch that is going to catch that input mismatch exception. I'm going to put E as well. And well, why is it not working? Well, because this input mismatch exception is not in this same package that the other one was in. This one is in the package java.lang, which is always imported, but this one is in java.utils. Hold on, it shows here java.utils, which I need to import. What I imported from java.utils is just the scanner. If I want to import everything inside of it, there's something maybe I've never talked about, but you can put a star. This means all the classes inside java.utils, bring them. It's not really optimized.
When you create a JBan alpha.
For example, for the swing, yes, you can just use import java x.swing.star, and then you don't need to import the button, the J button, the J panel, the J frame, and things like that. All of them are going to be imported. But it's not really optimized, but anyways, this is just a simplification that you can have. Now you see, it's not giving me any problems anymore. Now for this one, I'm just going to say the value entered is not a number. So I can just maybe do something else. I can do error. So I can show like there's an error message. Now I have two types of problems that I can have, and either the number is negative for the size of the array. The size of the array cannot be negative. Okay, and then if I enter another one, which is now this text, the value entered is not a number. Now if I manage to enter something that is correct, I'm just going to stick to the 2 and then put this is the first number. Now I have another exception, array index out of bound exception, because of this wrong thing that I added here on purpose just to raise the exception. So I'm going to catch again another exception, array index out of bound exception. It doesn't need any import because I paid attention and I read here this is part of java.lang. All java.lang does not need any import. They are imported always by default. And now I can say that the index of the array is outside of the possible values. So now I'm catching different type of exceptions, and if I run them now, regardless of what kind of problem I might have, it will always give me the correct handling of that exception. Now there's something I'd like to show you. The try catch is not only try catch that happens. You can also have another type of thing. Try catch comes with an optional thing, which is the last thing that can happen. It's like if you have if, else if, else if, else if there's no problems, keep going, but if there's a problem, then you try to catch here or here or here or here or whatever, but then there's an else. I can have something like this, but it's not exactly the same way, but let me show you what I mean. There's something called finally. So the try catch will come with try catch alone, or try with many catches, but you cannot have try alone and catch alone. Try and catch come together. At least you should have one catch. You can have many catches, but you can have at least, we have to have at least one catch for try. No, there's nothing. Well, you should have at least one case in the switch, but in the try you should have one catch at least. But the finally is optional. But if you have a finally, I'm just going to show you, the program is over. So the finally is really a subtle thing. It's not really that needed. You don't have to put it, but it's optional to put it, and specifically it's more in the organization parts of the coding that you're doing it. What I mean with that is this. Now how does this work first? If you run this without any problem, you're going to execute the try. You're not going to execute any catch because there was no exception, and you will execute the finally.
Also, it's error.
If you're executing this with then there's an exception, it will be caught, and it also will be executing. So it will always be executing. But now let's just try it. Now imagine I put the number to be 2, number 1. Oh yes, I don't need this one anymore. Let me run again. So I would like to have the code that runs and give me the average of these two numbers. So the sum is 3, and we said average, now we just calculated the sum. Okay, sum is 3, the program is over. And of course, if there was any mistake, the size of the can be negative and the program is over.
We didn't use it because if it's error
So if you use it, or if it's there's an exception or there's no exceptions, it will always be executed. So what's the point? Let me show even something even weirder. I don't even need to put it, because if I put this here, after there's something, either there's an exception or not. If there's an exception, it's going to catch the exception and then display the program is over. But if you run it and there are no exceptions, the program is over. So what's the point? Why should I spend some time to put this finally, open the brace, close the brace, and put it there? Well, let me show you something that we have never done, but normally we should have. Especially if you deal with files, because the scanner can also read files. If you open a file, you can just open and close a file. When you open this scanner with system.in, you're basically just reading from the keyboard, and then you don't need to really close it. But there's something in the scanner that allows you to do something. This keyb dot. Oh, there's no keyb, because keyb is only declared here. Let me take it outside, because I'd like to show you something. So I'm putting it outside of the try catch, because if I want this keyb to be accessible here, I need to get it out of this this block, because now it's inside this block, so it will be known everywhere, also inside here. KB dot, and this check this one, close, which is normally you need to do this, but hey, it might not have been initialized. Okay, let's just take this initialization. Actually, we just don't need it to be down there, and remove this. Now kb.close is not going to give me any mistake. So even if I don't put it here, it's just going to be fine. But we put the finally here because we would like to put some code that is related to this thing. There's something that we would like to just make sure that it's always showing that when I'm done without a problem, I'm going to execute this, because this is related to whatever this code is doing. Or if there's a problem, I'm going to catch it, and then I'm going to do this. It just shows that this code that you're typing here in the finally is related to something that might have happened here or here. That's what it does. That's the only thing that I can see why this finally can be used for. So it's just to organize your code, to show that, okay, maybe if I open the scanner, I don't forget to close it here or something. Or if I'm doing some code, I just would like to not forget to do it. So I put a finally just to put it. But again, finally is optional. You don't need to put it. And if you see, don't think it's a mistake. And I just wanted to make sure that you understand how it works. It just works the same way that if it doesn't exist, actually. If you don't have it, it's like if you have it. Because at the end, either there is no exceptions, everything went fine, you're going to execute whatever here. And if there's a catch, well, you're done with the catch, and then you keep going until you reach the end of your program. So it will keep going. So that's what this finally is all about. So I'm just going to leave it so I can have something there. Now there's even more. We wanted to calculate not the display under the sum, but the average. So I'm just going to say the average is sum divided by how many numbers. But this is int divided by int, so I need to convert one of them to double. You know, let's just make some double. It won't hurt, so I don't need to. Or if I don't do this, I need to typecast it. So whatever you choose. Now if I run this thing, if I type 5, well, I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now the average of those is going to be 3 because it's in the middle. And that's it. The program is over. Thank you. Now let's go back to this, because I'd like to show you something else that you can do. Now we'd like to say, because if the user enters a non-positive value of n, then an exception should be thrown. How can we throw an exception? Now I'm going to read this number, and before I put it here, I would like to try to throw an exception. So there's this if here that I can put to ask, okay, how many numbers, if this how many numbers is negative, I would like to throw an exception, create an exception. How can I do that? I can do it this way, by using throw. Throw is a keyword that tells, okay, generate an exception. Let me remind you that we've seen this throw before. When we were implementing some interfaces, let's say okay, when I'm doing well, as soon as I do this implement all abstract methods, you see Java gives me this piece of code but with this inside. Throw and then some new something. So it throws a new object. It creates a new object of some kind of class that is a subclass of This is subclass of runtime, which is a subclass of exception. So it creates some kind of an exception. And then this exception is going to be thrown. What does this mean, thrown? Well, I just don't need this anymore. It means now I can throw a new exception, and then you see I can send a message of that exception. What is the message? The number is negative. But this exception now is not reported. What does this not reported means? It means that I'm not catching it. I'm catching subclasses of exception, but I'm not catching exception. What I'm going to do, I'm going to say use this exception instead. I'm going to create a new negative array in size exception, and then this message here, just to show you that I'm just going to this is what I'm going to say, that the size of the array cannot be negative, and I'm going just to do something like this. There was an error, and then we just print it instead of print line, or print line, and then after that I can do this e.getMessage. Now what is the message? Well, this is the message that is going to be. Now when I create a new negative number exception, I'm generating an exception. When there's a problem, I am generating an exception, I'm catching it here. And this is now what is going to happen. It's basically the same thing that happened before, except now I'm using this getMessage to have it, and then I'm throwing this negative array exception.
Throw is like catch, right?
No, throw is like the one that generates an exception. You're creating an exception. Now when I'm throwing, now what happens? I run this code, I reach here, I type -1. This -1 is less than 0, so I get inside, I throw this here. When I throw this here, this becomes an exception.
Like message.
It creates an exception. Exception, not message. It's an exception. Because an exception will make the try stop. I'm stopping at this line, and then I need to go into one of the catches. The catch that is going to be of the same class or any one of its superclasses.
So you can create exception when you if it array index out of bound.
I can create an exception of anything. And I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to, instead of taking any one of these exceptions, I'm going just to throw them, each one as an input mismatch. But how can I know if it's an input mismatch here? Well, it's going to be kind of, how do I know that this is, when I'm reading int, I'm not reading int? Well, it's going to be more of a complication, but let's say, what if I do this? Now if you use exception, you see, you cannot use the others, because the others are never going to be caught, because this is a superclass of all the others. And if there's an exception, like a negative arrays exception, even if I have here negative array exception here, it's not going to be caught by here, it's going to be caught by this one. And some might say, oh, what if I put the order, I put it in the bottom? Can I do that? Well, yes. That means it tries to see first if it's an input mismatch, it will catch it. If it's an array index out of bound, it will catch it. If it's anything else, do this. So it will be for anything else. If it's an input mismatch, this is what is going to be the message. If this is array index out of bound, this is going to be the message. Else, it's going to just do this. Display error, and then get the message, whatever the message was going to be. Now in this case, this is going to work in all cases. So if I run now, this now becomes like a switch. Case this, case this. The default is, when you use exception, it's like using default to do that. If none of these are working, you catch them using this exception here. Now I'm running it again. So if I just enter now, what was the one that we took is like the negative array size. If I put -5, I get error. This was not an input mismatch. This was not an array index out of bound exception. This was caught by exception here. This is what I have here. If I run it again, this time with a right number, and then maybe just this thing. So the value entered is not a number, so this is why. Now this is the input mismatch exception that was caught. So this is throwing and catching exceptions. Yes?
Can I have a throw without a catch? Or but,
You can have a throw without a catch, but with this you have to do something else.
that's inside a try.
No, not inside of try, yes. You can throw not inside of a try, but I'd like to show you something. Now what if I'd like to take this and use it in a method? Calculate average. That I'd like to call like this. So if I'd like to have this kind of method, I need to create the method calculate average, which should be static because I'm calling it from the main, and the main is static. And now check this. I'm just using the same thing. But what if I don't want to catch these? I don't want to have these here. I still can have throw. That means this throws an exception. If there's an exception that happens, it's going to throw it. So if I run this thing here, if I run, that's not a problem. This is not the one that I wanted. But if I do something like this, I'm not catching the exception here because it's this line here that's created the problem. I'm not catching the exceptions. But what I wanted to say, you see, those who are going to use my method, I want them to not just use it without a try catch, because I know that there might be some exceptions that can be thrown. I can force a user of my methods to use a try catch. How can I do that? By using inside here in the method, I'm going to say that it's going to throw an exception. Which means now, as soon as I do this, it will not allow you to use this one without a try catch. So I create a method. I know that this method can throw some exceptions. If I'm not doing this, the user of my method can use it without a try catch. But because I want him to be safe and use the method in a safe way, I will add this throws exception, or any, because I'm using exception because many different kind of exceptions might happen. If you would like, you can put the list of them. You can put like negative array size exception, array index out of bound exception. You can put with the commas a lot of them that you're saying, okay, I'm throwing this, I'm throwing that. Or if you'd like to throw some general ones, I'm just throwing in any exception. Actually, doing this is not really helpful. It's better if you throw many of them just to list them. Just list them all. Array index out of bound exception, and then the last one is that we threw was input mismatch. Thank you. Input mismatch exception. So this now shows that I can throw different type of exceptions, and then when I'm using this, I can just hold on, surround it with a try catch, and then you see, because of it, I did it this way. That means it can detect that I need to catch these type of exceptions. So what to do when there's a negative exception, what to do when there's this array index out of bound exception, what to do if there's an input mismatch exception. Then I need to put the different, I can just put E here, so it's easier for me to know that this is the exception. And then here I put the code that I would like to happen. So if I do something like this, now I'm going to say negative error, array size cannot be negative, and here put all the other messages. Array index out of bound exception, I'm just going to say wrong index for the array. And then for the last one, the input data was not a number. If valid. So now, regardless of whatever is going to be happening, if I put something like this, the input data was not a valid number. Or if I run it with minus whatever, the array size cannot be negative. So I'm just designing my code, so I'm telling the programmer that is going to use my code if there are possibilities that some exceptions might be thrown, either by me or by some of the methods that I'm using. I can just use it with these throws here, and then the ones who are going to use my method, they're going to see clearly that there's some kind of exception that they need to handle if they would like to work with this properly. Yes?
When the catch, it will stop the program?
No, it will continue. Now if there's some other code here, for example, there's something else, that's some if else, and this is true, then do something, whatever, it's just going to continue here.
If you write minus as a string, it will catch two.
No, one of them. The first problem that happens, it will catch it and then stop at it. It will not just catch all of them. You don't go into two catches or three.
And continue.
Yes, it just execute whatever it's in the try. If there was a problem, then you go into the correct catch that was the problem, the correct exception.
Okay.
Yeah, one exception, yeah, one at a time. And if one of them is executed, it's not going to execute the others. It just stops and go and continue whatever needs to be done. Thanks. So whatever there is a problem, it will go into one of the catches and then stop and continue whatever is after the try catch block. Yes. Can we remove it? It refers to what? We can remove the method? This throws? Well, you can remove it, but this is not something that is advisable. For example, if I remove it, that's fine, no problems, right? But if someone is using your code, how does he know that there may be an exception that is thrown? So you're not helping the programmer who is going to use your code to know what kind of exceptions your code is going to generate or might generate. So it's always better to have it. If you're generating some exceptions, you just put them. Now, if you're generating exceptions like these, you just need to mention them. Or this can throw this kind of exception, this can throw this kind of exceptions. So this will allow those who are managing or dealing with or using your methods to know from the start what they should expect to handle, to manage. I'll just try to do the control space. I wanted to get the help, but it didn't. Yeah, now here. For new uses calculate average, you see, when I have the option, it just shows that this is the name, that it throws this kind of exceptions. So I know that if I need to work with this method, that this might be the exception that can be thrown. But now let's just summarize. We've seen we can have one try, many catches. We've seen that we can use this get message to get some kind of a message. If like the message that we sent is basically, if we generate some kind of exceptions like these, it's going to be this kind of message that we have. So this is going to be the message that is going to be, if I use get message, I'm going to get that. Now you see for the negative array index out of bound, I'm not going to use this, but I'm just going to use the get message. So e.getMessage. So it's going to be much easier for me just to demonstrate that whatever this text here that I'm sending, this is going to be the message that I'm getting here when I'm going to catch it. So if I do something like this negative, the size of the array cannot be negative. You see, I did not put that message from here, but it comes from whatever the message is. So now let's just go back. It says that the program should prompt the user to enter a number value n, and then if the user enters a non-positive value, then an exception should be thrown and caught with the message n must be positive. Okay, so they want us to write n must be positive, so that's what I'm going to do. For this one, if there's a negative, so I'm just going to say instead of that, n must be positive. And then, no, I did not. So if I type minus whatever, so the error message is going to be must be positive. So I'm throwing. So notice that this is throw with the s. It throws. The method throws, and now throw is just in a command that I'm executing. I cannot use throws here. It's a mistake. And then if there's an exception, as the user is entering the numbers, the error message should be displayed, and the user prompt to enter the number again. But now this is, if there was a problem, I want this to be, if the user to prompt the number again. But how can I do this here? Because you see, this is not a loop. But what I can do, I can just here, if there's a something that happens, I need to do it here. If there's a number that is going to be caught, if there's some wrong number given to me, I need to catch it here. So I can have also a try catch inside of a try catch. If I was using, remember if when I was using the try catch inside, I can also use a try catch inside of this if I want to. Now if this is a problem, if there is an exception, I'm just going to say, okay, error, try again. And then, you know what, I'm going to take this and put it inside the try, because if there was a problem here, I don't want this line to be executed. If there was a problem here, it's going to stop and go to the catch. And then when it goes to the catch, I want it to not go to the next I, so I'm going to decrement the I, so it will not accept that number and just move on. It's like if the user gives me a wrong number, I'm just going to go back and ask him again. Now this is going to make this, if the user gives me, for example, 5, and I'm typing this, it's getting me, oh, I have some kind of an infinite loop. Have I? You know why? It happened to us in the past because when there's something that like this that happens, it just remembers the input that was given, and we need to do something like this next line. Now what does this do? It just, whatever was entered, it will be thrown away, especially if you enter some kind of text and read it in numbers. It's going to be thrown away, so it doesn't stay in the memory. Now if I run it and type okay 5 and then type something like this, so it does not get stuck in an infinite loop. Now this is the one that solves the problem. If I remove it and then run it again, it will just be some kind of an infinite loop. Now let's say 5, and then if I type this, why is it an infinite loop? I want you to understand why. Because when I don't do this, whatever I type in the text is going to stay in the memory somehow, and it's going to be tried again when I use this line again. And then it's still the problem, same problem, and then it's going to try again, same problem, try again, same problem. So when I do this, it's like it takes whatever I entered and it throws it away, and then it starts again from scratch. Yes, Yusuf. Okay. All right. Now if I run, this is going to be I can try again. So if I tap a good number, it's going to be fine. Then if there's something wrong, try again, and yeah. You get the point. The minus in these numbers it is okay. For example, here or in the other numbers. Here, if I put a minus, that's fine. But if it is a text, that's not okay.
Question said that it shouldn't be minus.
Now the n should be minus, the integer. Or was it? So if the user enters the non-positive value of n, just the number of numbers. If there's an exception in entering the n numbers, that's what we're trying to do. So this is now something that is going to be managing the case when the user gives me something that is an input mismatch. Yes.
Can you explain the calculate average? How you write throws?
This throws. Now by mentioning throws here, I'm just mentioning that those who was going to be calling this method like this, they should be aware that this method might generate some exceptions. What kind of exceptions? Well, these ones that I'm listing here.
You delete the private statement. Calculate average.
This one?
Delete all the and also throws.
All this?
Yes.
Well, it becomes like what? A code that doesn't have. So this is a code that cannot be here. You cannot put some kind of a code in just like this. Where am I here? I'm inside the main? No, I'm not inside the main. So it's just inside of a class, and you put in some braces and put some code. It doesn't work like that. You have to give it a name, a method. So when you do something like this, when you're working with exceptions, or some method that might generate some exceptions, you could just mention it here, or if yourself you're generating exceptions, you just mention it here so the user of your method knows what to expect. And that's pretty much it. Now I'd like you to try that, and I'm just going to leave you with this so you can practice it, and then we'll try to do something similar in another exercise.